say, God save the Queen. Because nothing will save the Governor-General.
So began the most famous speech in Australian political history. It was delivered by Gough Whitlam in 1975 on the steps of Old Parliament House. He'd just become Australia's first ever sacked Prime Minister. Governor-General Sir John Kerr did the job, using vice-regal reserve powers to fire a democratically elected leader. It was a shocking end to Whitlam's 2 years, 11 months in office. In that time, he'd become a polarising figure. To many, he was a hero reformer, a gifted leader and brave battler for Australian independence in the world. As John Pilger writes, Australia briefly became an independent state during the Whitlam years, 1972 to 1975. He ended his nation's colonial servility. He abolished royal patronage, moved Australia towards the non-aligned movement, supported zones of peace, and opposed nuclear weapons testing. To others, and you may be one of them, he was an aloof and arrogant socialist. A Prime Minister whose government saw a blown budget, quadrupled spending and tripled unemployment. Andrew Bolt writes, Whitlam had grand dreams, but too often the price was the smashing of the dreams of the people he was elected to serve. Failure or martyr? What you're about to watch makes no judgment either way. Instead, we attempt to solve a 41-year-old mystery. Who really gave the order to get rid of Gough Whitlam? Now know this isn't some kind of loose change style conspiracy video put together in someone's bedroom. The producer of this broadcast is Phillip Publishing, Australia's leading independent financial publishing company. You are one of over 220,000 Australians who turn to us every day to understand what is really going on in the financial world and how it could affect your wealth and future plans. And the emphasis there is on the words, your wealth. I'm speaking to you now because the answer to the question, who really sacked Gough Whitlam, could have serious and very imminent financial implications for you. As I'll show you, 41 years ago, a bug was planted at the heart of Australia's economy. And soon, perhaps next year, like a sleeper cell, this bug is set to spring to life. What happens when a bug of this nature is installed? Eventually, the system it feeds on breaks down and collapses. I believe that's about to happen here in Australia, and it could have devastating consequences for our entire political and economic system. If it happens, it could cause a holocaust in our $3 trillion financial services industry. And it, I believe, will swallow up billions in capital that many ordinary Australians, perhaps you, assume is currently safely invested in shares, bonds, and property. It will be like nothing you've seen or experienced in your life. So yes, believe it or not, the likely answer to the question, who really sacked Gough Whitlam, could matter to you very much in the months and years ahead. I'd even go so far as to say this: between now and 2020, the shady group behind what the press has since called the dismissal and the doomsday device they've installed inside our economy could be the single biggest influencer of your carefully invested capital. Your hold in your hand cash, your privacy, and your core financial freedoms. You may think that's implausible, but all I ask is you view the evidence in this video with an impartial eye and then make your own judgment. Over Phillip Publishing's 11 years in Australia, we've been able to alert our subscribers to several key upcoming dangers, including the 2008 financial crisis and the wind down of the mining boom. If you were convinced by our research that the upcoming danger was real, you had time to prepare, and we told you how to do it. That's what I want to give you and the general public today, a new warning, and some simple actions to take if you think the evidence behind that warning is good. But we've never seen a danger quite like this before, and you've never seen anything like what you're about to watch from us either. If what you're about to see here is even half true, I believe nothing else may have a greater impact on your wealth and well-being over the next few years. Not the coming superannuation reforms, not the newly installed US president, not China, not even the decisions central bankers make. But how could a political event 41 years ago be so important right now? Keep watching and you'll find out. My name is Vern Gowdy. In a previous life, I was an award-winning financial planner. My firm was recognised for 4 years running by Independent Financial Advisor magazine as one of the top 5 in Australia. For nearly 3 decades, I helped Australians build and protect wealth. Boomers like me, self-made business people, private investors and high net worth individuals. By 2007 though, I'd sensed something was very amiss in the industry I'd dedicated my life to since 1986. And so I left to start a rather different project. Today I'm talking to you simply as a curious citizen, one who had a nagging hunch many years ago. A hunch that everything wasn't right in Australia. I've followed that hunch to its logical conclusion, which I'm presenting to you now. What follows is the culmination of a 10-year search for answers. In that time, I sought information from people without ties to political or investment institutions. Through a process of inclusion and elimination, I found a core group of independent thinkers who applied critical thinking to what's happening in the financial world now and what has happened in Australia over the last 40 years. They've helped me reach the controversial conclusion I've come to in this video. So too did a very powerful friend. Recently, I was invited to his chateau in France for a week. He told me he had some information I might find extremely interesting. He's not a whistleblower, former CIA operative, ex-military man, or someone who leaks classified government information. But over the last 35 years, this man, who has global business interests worth close to $1 billion, and his analysts have exposed and predicted some massive world shifts. For instance, they predicted in advance the Soviet Union collapse, the 1990s Japanese stock market crash, and the rise of Islamic terrorism. In 2000, this man sent out a note warning that a day of reckoning was at hand for the dot-com boom. That very day, the Nasdaq began a 2-year, 77% decline. And more recently, his team predicted the crash of the housing bubble in 2008, along with US mortgage giants Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Put simply, when this gentleman advised you to get on a plane because he has something interesting for you, you hang up the phone and book tickets. Now, if you've followed my recent work, including a book I wrote last year called The End of Australia, if you haven't read that book, I've arranged for you to download a complimentary digital version today. You'll know that I believe we have a broken, manipulated, and corrupt financial system, and that eventually this system is going to break down. But on my recent trip to France, I discovered just how deep the rot really goes and exactly who is responsible for it. In short, I have learned about a group of unelected insiders that has existed for many decades. Since the 1970s, this shadowy group has spread its tentacles around the world, silently expanding to take over the global money system, and even toppling governments that weren't with the program. As I'm about to show you, they are now here, in Australia. You won't recognise them. Most are not public figures. You didn't vote them in. Although most of them conduct their business in Canberra, influencing policy, tilting rules in their favour, seeking concessions for multinationals, finding loopholes for special interests, essentially increasing their wealth at the expense of yours. British newspaper The Guardian conducted a rare investigation into this group's reach here in Australia. On the 6th of May 2016, it concluded, "This shadow government operates without the consent of the governed." But as I discovered from my contact in France, soon, perhaps very soon, these well-connected parasites could set off a terrible crisis here in Australia. Now, I know all this might sound fantastical, and I'll bet you've already heard more than a few over-the-top conspiracy theories and wacky ideas from people who either don't have all the facts or who intentionally try to mislead you. But let me put this to you. How fantastical would Donald Trump's run for the US presidency have sounded to you just a few years ago? Or Britain voting to leave the European Union? Both Brexit and the rise of Donald Trump were not outlier events. Both represent the first open rebellions against the secret global elite I'm going to name in this video. An elite that holds all the power, wealth, and privileges. An elite that, as I will show, seized all the power in Australia 41 years ago and installed a doomsday device deep inside our economy. Now, some of the facts I'm about to tell you may seem incredible, yet based on the reports I've uncovered, they are all true. And it has led me to these two questions. Who was really behind Australia's forgotten coup of 1975? And why is the possible answer potentially so important to you, your family, and your wealth today? Part 1. We need to solve the Whitlam problem. Much has been written and speculated about the dismissal. Love him or loathe him, there is one fact about Gough Whitlam no one disputes. He believed fiercely that Australians should run Australia, and that no foreign power or group of unelected officials should control his country's resources and dictate its economic and foreign policies. Over 3 short years in charge, he took actions to ensure this. One American journalist said at the time that no country had reversed its posture in international affairs so totally without going through a domestic revolution. John Pilger writes, he proposed to buy back the farm. In drafting the first Aboriginal lands rights legislation, his government raised the ghost of the greatest land grab in human history. Britain's colonisation of Australia and the question of who owned the island continent's vast natural wealth. Is it possible that for the shadowy group we've been talking about, the direction Whitlam was taking Australia in was unacceptable? That some very powerful people didn't want Australia to be Whitlam's independent state, one that controlled its own wealth and resources? Let me show you a photograph. This man's name is Christopher Boyce. He's a CIA leaker who has repeatedly claimed that the US spy agency was involved in the dismissal of Gough Whitlam's government in 1975. According to The Australian, he asserts that Governor-General Sir John Kerr was a CIA flunky and that he was known within the CIA as our man Kerr. Mr. Boyce says the dismissal was a coup executed by the US, tantamount to the velvet glove version of the government overthrow in Chile. In her book, The Dismissal Dossier, Australian research professor Jenny Hocking makes it very clear that Kerr had help. Even Dr. John Blaxland, author of The Protest Years, said there is at least circumstantial evidence that the CIA and the Gerald Ford administration was involved in the 1975 coup. So as you can see, it's actually not that controversial to put forward this theory about outside interests influencing Australian politics. And while it's speculation, none of it is wild, tinfoil hat stuff. Because here's what we do know for absolute certain. Gough Whitlam was deeply concerned about what the CIA was up to here, at this spy base. This is Pine Gap, near Alice Springs. This is the same base Edward Snowden recently revealed as a massive information vacuum. Whitlam warned the US ambassador, try to screw us or bounce us and Pine Gap will become a matter of contention. According to the dismissal dossier, Victor Marchetti, another CIA operative who actually helped establish Pine Gap, said, this threat to close Pine Gap caused apoplexy in the White House. A kind of Chile coup was set in motion. So the White House sent this man, named Marshall Green, to Canberra as ambassador in 1974. Nicknamed the coup master, Green was a key player in the Indonesian coup of 1965. Less than a year after he was installed in Canberra, Whitlam was gone. On 10 November 1975, the day before he was sacked, Whitlam obtained a top-secret telex message sent by Theodore Shackley. He was yet another coup master, heading up the CIA's infamous East Asia Division, and instrumental in sparking the coup against Salvador Allende in Chile in 1973. According to John Pilger, Shackley's message was read to Whitlam. It said that the Prime Minister of Australia was a security risk in his own country. On the 11th of November, Gough Whitlam was set to blow the lid on all of this in Parliament and out CIA agents in Australia, according to Guy Rundle in Crikey. He never got the chance. He was sacked that very day. The Whitlam problem was solved. Now here's where it gets really interesting. And here's where it all ties in directly to what's happening in Australia right now. What has been set in motion to occur very soon, and the direct impact this could have on your wealth and well-being in the coming years. Based on the information above, in one move on 11 November 1975, a cabal of unelected insiders took control of Australia. And nobody even noticed. Importantly, they hold control to this day. And if what follows in the rest of this video is correct, their secret reign could bring Australia to a historic crisis. Now, I'm not talking about the CIA, or the American government, or the IMF, or a club of central bankers, or the Freemasons, or the Rothschilds. It's actually far less controversial than that. But the group in question now has its tentacles spread throughout Australia's economy, our society, and our political and security systems. In fact, it exerts control over the entire global financial system. Gough Whitlam may have met his fate in 1975 because he had the audacity to try and break free from this group. As CIA leaker Christopher Boyce has maintained, he was a threat. He was viewed as a threat to the program. As I'm about to show you, the group quite possibly responsible for the Whitlam dismissal is far, far more powerful now than it was in 1975. Its members hail from all over the world. Many, since 1975, are now Australian. Most are American, but once you discover who they are, what their motivation is, what they've done, and what they plan to do next, you'll then realise why your trip to the polling booth in the 2016 federal election was pretty much a waste of time, and why there is little difference between Liberal or Labor, despite what they claim in their campaigns. Why everything that goes on in Canberra is a useless pantomime show, funded by you. That is why most people tune out, picking up the occasional sound bites that shape their world view, one that usually accords with how they see the world in the first place. The true reason for Australia's growing income disparity, why the top 20% of households get half the income and the bottom 20% get just 4%. It's not because the mining boom is over. In my view, it's because of the dozens of trade, tax and regulatory measures that were put in place to enrich the group we're focusing on today. Why those driving the global financial system to the next calamity have no intention of stopping, but instead are speeding up. Reason? These insiders have their parachute strategy in place. They have taken the necessary precautions to protect their wealth while the masses, as usual, suffer the horrific financial consequences. Why the big four banks really occupy the top places in the All Ordinaries Index, and how the once honourable profession of banking has been reduced to an industry of product floggers. The true reason Australia's bloated $3 trillion financial industry has grown so powerful so quickly. Why the next credit crisis could see it contract by at least 30%, and how I believe it could try to take you down with it. And how the cabal of power brokers you're about to meet caused the GFC, stage managed its aftermath, but why GFC 2 will be too big for even them to control. They contained the last one in 2008, just. These non-public, non-elected leaders did that by piling on more debt in the form of printed dollars and suppressed interest rates. Today, there's $60 trillion more debt than in 2008. As a result, our global money system is no longer ours. It is the money system created by and for these financial insiders. And debt is to them what blood is to vampires. They cannot survive without it. Today, almost the entire world, its stocks, bonds and real estate, along with its businesses, retailers, factories and mining firms, as well as investors, bonused up executives, papered up speculators, PhD economists and politicians. Almost everybody with wealth or power depends on the insiders' cheap money. But there's a reason I'm taking the time to record this warning for you today. See, I believe the group I'm about to expose is losing control, and that the money system they created has reached its expiry date. When the financial system has a seizure again, which it probably will, this one could disrupt our lives in ways you never thought possible. First, in my view, your capital tied to equity markets will tank fast. Your superannuation fund could shed 30% in a matter of months, like many did in 2008, but then continue down, down, down. Panic selling in the property market, the whole Australian lending system seizing up, free-flowing credit reduced to a trickle. All the while, the global media focusing on the financial markets like never before, gawping at the destruction like it's another 9/11. This time, we might see what a real global financial crisis looks like. And I believe the shadow government I finally name in public in this video will be responsible for the whole fiasco. As author Charles Hugh Smith states, the irony is they themselves are the source of instability. The crowds of enraged citizens are merely manifestations of an unstable, brittle system that is cracking under the strains of extreme wealth and power inequality. My guess is you already feel in your bones that something is coming. This video will show you more clearly what it might look like and how to get ready for it. It's a message I take no joy in delivering. But someone has to. Government, institutional economists, real estate agents, share brokers and financial planners are not going to tell you anything other than she'll be right. Why? For two reasons. Firstly, most have absolutely no idea how we have arrived at this point of no return, because the group I'm going to introduce you to have actually perpetuated this ignorance. We've seen astonishing admissions of how they do this in the WikiLeaks dump of Clinton campaign emails. One of them saying, We've all been quite content to demean government, drop civics, and in general conspire to produce an unaware and compliant citizenry. In a moment, you'll see how this unawareness could impact your finances and future here in Australia. How this cabal has wrested control over where you must put your retirement savings, who takes a fat cut of them, how and when you can access them, and how much tax you're made to pay on them. You'll see they have brainwashed Australians into thinking it is normal to go deeper and deeper into debt. After all, this is the way it has been for all our adult lives, right? Many look at the world's recovery since 2008 and think central bankers have figured out how to save the world with printed dollars. Why worry? The experts who run the money system have our backs. As I'm about to show you, that is the most dangerous lie of all. But there's a second reason. The people you are supposed to trust are not warning you of what's about to happen. The unelected insiders we're about to unmask actually realise the system is at breaking point. But I think they have no intention of revealing an economic fraud. Why? Because it would endanger their capacity to milk this sham for all it's worth, right to the very end. You need to get your head around this quickly, because a reckoning of their making is coming. Agents of this group have infiltrated every area of Australia's investment and financial industries. Institutions, funds management, financial planning, real estate, stockbroking, mortgage broking, credit services, investment journalism. As author Michael Cavell puts it, this group has kept its vice grip on power through a rigged system. But what happens when the manipulated masses realise that the system is finally breaking down? We may soon find out. Market forces cannot be tamed indefinitely, even by the central bankers, even by the group you're about to learn about, powerful as it is. As I'll show you, based on previous cycles, you could realistically see a $500,000 portfolio, heavy in stocks, drop to $250,000 or $200,000 over the course of a year, then spend a decade zigging and zagging back to break-even level. Could you cope with a hit like that? The fallout from the share market could also impact property values as well. The loss of money and confidence tends to create a fallout in other asset classes. During the GFC, every asset class, with the exception of cash, was caught in the market's downdraft. Thankfully, there is a sliver of good news in this video, and it is this. You can take specific steps to protect yourself and your family on the individual level, but you must start now. These steps are not political. Although I touch on politics in this broadcast, I won't offer political solutions, because there are none. Today's message is about your money and your future. It's about your ability to pay your bills and retire comfortably. It's about fighting back against a group that has insidiously taken ownership of Australia and you over the last 4 decades. Also, it's designed to help you help your children live in a country that, in my view, could be about to become less prosperous, less stable, and far less carefree. I expect significant tax increases, welfare cutbacks, broken promises, wage stagnation, and higher or underemployment. More imminently, you must prepare for the possibility of asset prices undergoing a severe correction. My goal is to give you some solid hints on how best to make these preparations, starting now. The main focus will be on individual financial solutions you can put in place immediately. You can think of this set of solutions, which we'll get to shortly, as the equivalent of a financial Noah's Ark. When the markets wash away all in front of them, your ark will float above the flood that rages below. But you must build your ark before it rains. And as I will clearly demonstrate in this video, the clouds are gathering. Before we get to your ark, you need to know. Part 2. Why the Australian government voted in on 2 July 2016 is just the tip of the iceberg. I'm sure you've heard the phrase, just the tip of the iceberg. Only 10% of the iceberg appears above the water, while the remaining 90% remains unseen, below the surface. What I'll try to show you for the rest of this video is that the government you elected, if you trotted to the polling booths on July 2nd, is actually just the tip of the iceberg. By the way, the exact same goes for the government Americans just elected. For both Australian and American governments, the remaining 90%, which controls the real money and power, is unelected and hidden from view. The tip of the iceberg, the part you can see sitting above the waterline, is the elected, visible government. It's the Senate and the House of Representatives, the Prime Minister, your state and local governments. But the part you can't see represents the real power. It's called the deep state. The iceberg represents the Australian government. The deep state doesn't face elections and isn't limited by term limits or the public voice. It answers to no one but itself. It has its tentacles all over the planet. But here in Australia, it consists of careerist bureaucrats, shady party donors who get to define all sorts of policies, from mining to climate to health. Lobbyists and vested interests who seek concessions from Canberra at the expense of you and I. High-ups in the massive Australian banking sector. Spin doctors for our mammoth financial industries. Even the silent intelligence and surveillance apparatus. In 2015, for instance, Bernard Keane, writing for Crikey, exposed the massive expansion of the national security apparatus during the Abbott government. Few of these reforms, he writes, were ever justified with evidence or logic, designed not so much to protect Australians from the statistical, trivial threat of terrorism as to convey a permanent sense of threat and crisis to a frightened electorate. He continued, the unaccountable, unelected and secretive officials of the security bureaucracy had done well out of Abbott. Hundreds of millions in extra resources and vast additional powers over the lives of ordinary Australians. Politicians come and go, but the spies, spooks and civil servants of the deep state remain. National security is just one of dozens of seemingly disparate forces that form Australia's deep state. And their main goal, in my opinion, is simple: to preserve and expand their own power. Is it that much of a wild theory that solving the Whitlam problem all those years ago was a move by the deep state to neutralise a threat to that power? For instance, it's recently come to light that the chief of Australia's domestic spy agency, ASIO, declined a direct order from Whitlam to sever all ties with the CIA. As Guy Rundle writes for Crikey, ASIO was acting as a small version of a deep state, doing the bidding of the US at a time when the Whitlam government had started to refuse and resist US intelligence cooperation. Pilger actually describes Marshall Green, the US ambassador sent here right before Whitlam's sacking, as an imperious, sinister figure who worked in the shadows of America's deep state. No one will ever know for sure what really happened, because, as I'm about to show you, the deep state is very, very good at hiding its tracks, rewriting history and manipulating the narrative. But there is no doubt about this whatsoever. Today, in Australia, the deep staters are in the driving seat. Just as the portion of the iceberg beneath the water forms 90% of the iceberg's total mass, the shadowy deep state exerts 90% of the Australian government's power. This is why nothing seems to change in Canberra. Put simply, the deep state does not share your concerns or your problems. Often, it intentionally causes many of your problems because it profits from them. Most importantly, it is concerned with its own wealth and power. In short, the deep state is your enemy, and it has its claws in everything. As Bernard Keane says, its members include the Indian billionaire who gets special access to a PM, the DFAT bureaucrats handing ever more power to multinationals, the Treasury bureaucrats eager to cut what little tax multinationals still pay, the unaccountable security bureaucrats happy to exploit desperate politicians to give themselves ever greater power and ever greater resources to use that power. Now sure, I completely understand that this sounds over-conspiratorial, but anyone who knows me or follows my work knows that I do not traffic in conspiracies. And I'll be honest, I don't know for sure if the calculus of an early global deep state really took out Gough Whitlam, nor will I ever know. But I am very, very certain that a global deep state is real, and that it has a massive hand, the deciding hand, in a financial reckoning I have been predicting and researching for some time now. The existence of the deep state is not really that controversial or new. There is no secret handshake or hidden membership list. Rather, this shadow government and its leaders potentially exist right out in the open. Here in Australia, in America, in the United Kingdom, and likely in every Western democracy in the world. As Mike Lofgren, who worked in the American Congress for 27 years, wrote, "There is another government concealed behind the one that is visible, a hybrid entity of public and private institutions ruling the country, connected to, but only intermittently controlled by, the visible state whose leaders we choose." In America, the deep state has controlled almost everything for years: the military and intelligence services, Homeland Security and the TSA, Social Security, medical care, the federal income tax system, the US dollar, the banks, and the entire financial system itself. What is less well known is how deeply it has its hooks into Australia. We are a country where, as Keane puts it, the forms of democracy proceed, but they look more and more like theatre every day, while the real exercise in power takes place out of sight and scrutiny. At this point in the broadcast, I'd like to take a breath. Because now that we've identified the likely existence of the deep state, what comes next is to scrutinise the deep state's power, to expose the areas of your life it might be meddling with, to show you its hand in the next crisis, and to give you some tools with which to protect yourself, and even a few weapons you could use to fight back against the deep state. The deep state is shorthand for the many people in and out of government, the foxes, as Italian economist Vilfredo Pareto called them, who control policy decisions and who use them to tilt the playing field in their direction. In 2016, you saw the people of Great Britain rise up against the deep state and its cronies. As Michael Cavell writes, June's Brexit vote was a critical battle in the long war against the deep state. British citizens decided they're tired of surrendering their democratic rights to multinational corporations, unelected bureaucrats, and feckless central bankers whose policy goals are at direct odds with regular people. The more wealth and power the elite sucks out of the stagnant system, the more the typical citizen feels trapped and robbed. The Brexit vote was an attempt to escape. I'm recording this video to help you enact your own escape here in Australia, starting today. Specifically, we'll focus on the one area of the Aussie economy where the deep state has most influence, the financial sector. With nearly $3 trillion tied up in the Australian wealth management industry, generating tens of billions in annual management and administration fees, where you invest your money has become massive deep state business. It's an Australian equivalent of America's military industrial complex. And here we get to the beating heart of today's message. My research, along with fresh intelligence brought to me by the powerful friend I'll introduce to you shortly, has uncovered a weak link in the entire chain of the deep state's global power and influence, a fatal flaw that could threaten the whole financial system at once. You see, while these powerful insiders can overthrow governments, manipulate huge multinationals, and even start wars, there was one thing they couldn't understand or control, and now it could be on the verge of a major blow-up. Part 3. A nation of sheep will beget a government of wolves. It's time to introduce the near-billionaire businessman who recently invited me to his home in France. His name is Bill Bonner. You may already know the name. Bill has co-written 3 New York Times best-selling books, been interviewed on countless TV shows, and been invited to Washington to meet with political leaders. Over 35 years, Bill has grown the biggest network of independent financial research on the planet, operating across 20 different countries with 2.4 million subscribers worldwide. You may have seen their documentary, IOUSA, which includes interviews with Bill, Warren Buffett, Alan Greenspan, Ron Paul, and others. It was screened at the Sundance Film Festival and widely praised by critics. In fact, after seeing the film, Roger Ebert made it one of his top 5 documentary films of that year, writing a letter to our grandchildren. I have just seen a documentary titled IOUSA that snapped into sharp focus why your lives may not be as pleasant as ours. Bill has spent decades exposing and often predicting the most important events and trends in recent world history. After making these predictions, a single thread emerged. As Bill says, that thread nagged at me until I really grasped it. One entity, one group, appeared to play a major role in each and every one of these major world events. Eventually, I came to see that this group was the deep state. Bill has been warning for years about growing debt and just how dangerous a broke government can be. But he summoned me to France because he's since realised the debt mounting up in the international monetary system is really just a symptom of the disease itself. Now, you don't have to be an economist to know that if America's financial system fails, we all have to live through the consequences. You saw a small taste of that in 2008. And here is the obvious and immediate problem. America's credit system is insolvent, and when it fails, which I think it surely will do, it could wipe out more wealth across the world than any other crisis in history. America's credit system has gone into territory never seen before. America's unique status as the world's superpower has enabled it to keep borrowing at unheard of levels, all on the assumption that they're good for it. They are not. And at some point, someone will realise that. Credit is not real money. It's just the flip side of debt. You run up too much debt and you go broke. You can't build the biggest credit system in world history and expect it to stay standing forever. Eventually, someone loses faith. As Bill and I discussed in France, it's vital you start thinking very hard about what could happen next when that faith is finally gone.
You know, just that people want to try to understand what's going on, that the money system set up in 1971 was both fraudulent and unsustainable, but the deep state benefits from it so much. And the deep state, I'm talking about the large group of everybody who benefits from a credit-based society, and that includes the government, the big business,
in Australia,
Wall
in
Street,
England, everywhere.
There's a huge group there, but they are so tied into it, so implicated, so their fortunes, their reputations all depend on it. They're not going to give it up. So that's not, their policies are not going to change in that way. What they're going to do is they're going to be desperate to keep it, and the only thing they have to work with is more money, more phony money, fake money, more credit. And so I think we're going to get into a period of very great volatility, great danger. We're going to see some pretty exciting things happen because of this desire on the part of the authorities to keep this bubble inflated.
So hopefully you're convinced by now that my focus on the deep state is not just wild speculation and conspiracy theories, and why, as Australia's largest truly independent financial publishing company, we feel we have an obligation to shine a light on it. Because the deep state and the next debt crisis are joined at the hip. The system it built is a credit system, not a wealth system. Credit, not real money, is what people are spending now. Thanks to the deep state, the real money has been taken out of the system. And every credit dollar has a dark side to it, debt. There's more debt outstanding now than twice the value of every single home in America put together. More than 3 times the value of every single US bank's assets combined. More than 20 times the trillions of dollars the US government collects in taxes every year. There is $60 trillion more debt since we had the last financial crisis, which was caused by debt. Credit must be paid back. But here's the truth, it can't be. And that's the fatal flaw in the deep state's master plan to enrich itself. There's not enough money in the system to pay back the debt. $10.2 trillion vanished during the financial meltdown of 2008. This next crisis will likely wipe out 6 times that amount. And look, we're no longer talking about another big dip in the ASX here. My guess is the next one will be in the range of a best case scenario of 50% market crash and worst case 80%, possibly somewhere in the middle. And I'm talking about the whole global financial system shutting down in a way it just escaped in 2008. Why is this of concern to you here in Australia? Because you are amongst the most vulnerable citizens in the world when a collapse happens, because of the deep state's influence here. This is the reason I've prepared this video for you, to help you understand how exposed your wealth could be, to show you what my family and some of my friends are doing to prepare themselves, and some low-cost, easy-to-implement counter-attack strategies for yourself, your family and your wealth, as we potentially enter an unprecedented moment in Australian history. When will this moment happen? The one thing I have learnt over 30 years in finance is that you cannot time markets. Vested interest, powerful media message and momentum can delay the inevitable outcome for much longer than you might think possible. But all signs point to it happening sooner rather than later. Why will Australians in particular be on the front line of the great coming credit contraction? There are 2 reasons you, based here in Australia, will be among the most vulnerable citizens in the Western world when the next crash occurs. First, because we have one of the most bloated financial services sectors on the planet. The obscene enrichment of our big 4 banks is a prime example. The amount of your money that has flowed into their coffers in recent years is simply astounding. The big 4's profits this year will be around $30 billion. That's roughly the Commonwealth Government's education budget. How did it get this way? Simple. Too much debt. The bank managers of yesteryear were prudent and not afraid to say no to those they considered less than creditworthy. But as the influence of the deep state grew down under, so did the banks. They prospered more than any other sector of the economy. The encouraged formula for the bank's success has been something called fractional banking, the ability to charge interest on money that didn't exist until the banks created it. The more money central banks conjured up out of thin air, the more profit our banks make. The bank managers of old, who failed to adapt to this new aggressive approach of meeting sales targets, were shown the door. The new deep state-aided banking model may be highly profitable, but it's also leading to Australia's ruin. When the next crisis hits and banks buckle, don't expect any kind of accountability. The bank executives who oversaw this flawed business model will have taken their massive bonuses and long scarpered. There is a second reason Australians are particularly at risk, and that is compulsory superannuation. We, more than almost any other nation on earth, have had our retirements hogtied to the financial markets. As economist Mike Rafferty from the University of Sydney Business School told the ABC, over the last 20 years, we've forced more and more people into the stock market through compulsory superannuation. He reckons around 90% of superannuation funds are linked in some way or another with stock market returns. Australia is probably the most highly exposed in terms of putting its retirement savings in the stock market. How much of ordinary life do we push through financial markets? How much anxiety do you want people approaching or in retirement to be facing? But here's the really scary thing. The real danger here is not your own financial future chained to a market that's about to crash. A lot of Australians also have their livelihoods at risk. Call it survival or self-interest, but there is no way they'll want to be part of the massive contraction when it happens. Until the crash arrives, and possibly even during it, I believe the investment industry will use every trick in the book to misinform you. They will likely make out you're stupid for wanting less risky assets like cash, gold, and index funds, which also happen to have the lowest fee structures. Funny that. They may continue to pretend they're working for you instead of themselves and their institutional owner. Consumer advocacy group Choice found Australia's 6 largest financial planning groups had consistently directed customers to their own superannuation products. They will likely pump an even bigger portion of the fees they extract from you into marketing campaigns to convince you to stay in an increasingly unstable market. They may also create the illusion that highly priced active funds management delivers superior performance, when all the data shows that's simply just not true. Put simply, we are approaching a global financial event, and the people you rely on for financial guidance will not guide you through this event. I believe they will lead you to disaster.
We can't predict the future, but you've got to be careful, and you cannot rely. I guess the main message that I have, and I think you do too, is that you can't depend upon these markets or the kind of analysis that you get from the financial professionals. They are all, focused on a special agenda. Period in history, which is unrepeatable, unreliable, and fundamentally, I think, fraudulent. But that's to be determined later when
history will write that page.
So with all that in mind, we reach part 4. What should you do? Okay, stay with me because now we get to the most important part of this presentation. In order to protect yourself, it is absolutely key you understand 3 things. 1, how the Australian financial industry has been taken over and completely warped by the deep state debt agenda. 2, the potential lies you'll be told to keep you on the ride, even as the money-go-round slows and stops. 3, you need to take action, meaning you need to learn effective strategies to start insourcing your financial future out of their hands and back into yours. Over 80% of financial planners are owned or associated with one of Australia's 6 largest institutions, the Big 4 banks, AMP and Macquarie. All 6 have been named and shamed for poor advice. It is time, viewer, for you to take the power back. As Mario Puzo wrote in The Godfather, I have no intention of placing my fate in the hands of men whose only qualification is that they manage to con a block of people. The system has been rigged by the application of debt, debt and more debt. Everything rests on the illusion that asset prices always go up. But what if that illusion is about to fail? What if a new trend is being established? What if markets are in the early years of a long-term downtrend? Impossible? That's what they said about the prospect of a nationwide slump in US property values. Even if some in the investment industry secretly have doubts about the market's power of recovery, do you honestly believe they'd share these thoughts with you? their livelihood depends on projecting an air of optimism and promoting the redemptive powers of the share market. So, how do you fight back in a rigged system? It's an excellent question. And one perhaps I am uniquely qualified to provide answers to. Remember, for the best part of 3 decades, I worked inside this system, winning multiple awards. It was during the post-2000 tech wreck downturn that I began questioning the largely unquestioned beliefs underpinning this system. I felt there had to be a better way to protect clients and run a viable business. Looking back, the idea was admirable, but naive. The deep state has ensured the public is constantly fed the same old spin. Things will keep going up, or if they are down, they will soon go up. Any economic downturn is destined to be a soft landing. The name of the game is to not do or say anything that spooks investors or potential investors. So in 2007, I effectively became a refugee from an industry I no longer recognised. I could see what was coming, but I realised my industry was no longer the solution. It had become a big part of the problem. The financial planners I know are good people. Most are caring people with integrity, but they now operate in an environment where the game is rigged towards the house. How do individual investors like you take the power back? This question was the genesis of a project I've been working on for 18 months. I have used knowledge, experience and critical thinking from both inside and outside the industry to create for you the definitive Fight Back Guide. Revealing just a fraction of the secrets, tips and strategies contained in this guide would be commercial suicide for any financial planner. But I'm going to do it today. Not just because, no longer being affiliated with the industry, I am in a unique position to do so, but because I feel I must. It's a moral obligation. Look, common sense, gut feel, intuition, call it what you will, is telling you all is not well with the global economy. You wouldn't have watched this far if that were not true. But the fact is, no one has any idea how this fiasco is going to play out, because we've never seen this before. As Bill Bonner puts it, the deep state has, over years, changed people's behaviour, from prudent investing to irresponsible speculating. Now, the world is full of desperate, debt-funded gamblers who cannot survive a return to normal. What will that return to normal look like? And how can you survive it? Whatever happens, I believe it will be shocking. As we discussed in France, you should actually see soaring markets right before the big fall.
And if I'm right about getting to the phase where the Fed switch to more aggressive money pumping methods, we could see huge increases in stocks.
We could.
To me, those are increases you don't want to go after because they're just too dangerous. And I remember it was like 2007 or 2006 when the world's top performing stock market was Zimbabwe.
Yes.
That doesn't mean you wanted to have money in Zimbabwe. It was just too dangerous. But people need to be aware that this market that we've had for the last 25 years is not at all a normal market. And when things go up like this long, this strongly, you just can't have confidence in them. So the investment advisor, the professional, goes to you and say, look, it just goes up and up and up. It goes always up. You're crazy not to have your money in it. That's very bad advice.
Now more than ever, you need to question the established beliefs of the Australian investment industry. These beliefs have never really been challenged because the conditions that gave rise to them in the first place have always been favourable, courtesy of debt accumulation and central banker intervention. That era is ending. My new guide aims to help you navigate this transition, to empower you with the tools you need to take back the power over your financial future. For instance, in this guide you will discover a comprehensive 10-step alternative financial plan that aims to navigate you from here through the next crisis and into retirement, with your estate intact for your children and grandchildren. Your planner will probably scoff at this plan because it's smart, realistic, low cost, and puts you first. Why your planner's past performance sales pitch is deadly and 180 degrees wrong. Past performance sells. It's easy bait for the great unwashed investing public. People want to back proven winners, but conclusive data shows this doesn't just not work, it costs you over time. The dirty trick used by fund managers to skew their results into the positive so they can feed off your money for as long as possible. The lower tax lure exposed how the industry invents tax offset schemes as capital honey traps. Most fail and provide a great source of revenue for receivers. The outrageous truth about Australian hedge funds. New data shows that when you account for management costs and fees, less than 1% manage to outperform the index on a net basis, meaning your final odds of identifying the outperforming active manager are a demoralising 1 in 100. A hedge fund alternative that outperformed actively managed portfolios by 80% over a 16-year period, from 1997 to 2012. I found this gem buried in the notes section of a report by Morningstar, an investor's guide to deconstructing the true motives of whoever's advising you. Look, I'm not breaking a big story by stating financial planners, mortgage brokers, real estate agents, etc. have their own agendas. They do not have appropriate advice targets, they have sales targets. They need to sell you advice that makes their institutional masters money. They deny it, but most of us know it already. But the full extent of the potential conflicts of interest, which I reveal in my book, will shock you. The growth delusion that could result in a 40% loss of capital over 9 years. Add in advisor fees and it's more likely 50%. How following your financial planner's risk advice over the next 5 years could actually cost you 18% returns per annum. A deep state backup plan to commandeer your bank savings. With a full-blown credit crisis in play, will your bank savings really be protected? Even if they are on paper, does the government actually have the billions of dollars to honour the deposit guarantee? Revealed, who's really eating your pie in terms of hidden fees, percentages and commissions? You already know managed funds, investment administration services and financial planners all eat from your pie, but do you realise just how many slices they're taking? The coming rearguard action from the Australian financial complex. In military terms, a rearguard action is a defensive and delaying fight engaged in by a retreating enemy. I show you what this could look like when the next crash happens here, and how the financial industry will likely roll out high-profile economists and industry commentators to reassure people even as the collapse is happening. 8 guiding principles to insourcing your future back from the financial services industry. How to create, retain and potentially advance your wealth without their help, no matter what happens in the years ahead. This expose focuses on the broken Australian financial system, your money and the people who have influence over it. When you dig into these facts, ones that aren't mentioned in the Australian Financial Review, you'll start to see why so much money is being made here by the financial industry, but not by you. Look at this. We are the #1 in bank profits compared to the total economic output. Keeping what you've seen so far in mind, doesn't that scare you? If you're worried about what's been happening in the global economy and how it may potentially affect your wealth in Australia, my new book is a must-read. It's called How Much Bull Can Investors Bear? Seeing Through the Australian Investment Industry's Smoke and Mirrors. Its goal is simple, to help you take back control of your financial future. For instance, I'm going to show you some tips that I believe will allow you to declare your own personal war against the 2% ticket clippers. The average bundle fee for a client is about 2% of your capital. Then there's tax. Fees and taxes act like friction on your investments. They slow down the compounding rate of return you can achieve. It's crucial you minimise both, even in a great market. When the market is dire and starts producing single-figure returns or negative results, clipping 2% from your ticket can kill you. There are clever ways to dramatically slash your fees, even, in some cases, drive them down to zero. We cover them in Chapter 5 of How Much Bull Can Investors Bear? And you'll find Chapter 11 fascinating, but also perhaps the most disturbing. It's a takedown of the 8 core myths the financial industry propagates that are leading most Australians to disaster. Making smart investment decisions, removing yourself from harm's way or placing yourself in a position to capitalise on an opportunity requires you to know fact from fiction. The 8 deadly fictions outlined in Chapter 11 are inventions of the investment industry's well-funded marketing and spin departments. Now, I'm not charging $30 or $40 for this book in bookshops or on Amazon. It's the culmination of years of work, but it needs to get out there fast. You can download it immediately today and start reading it within the hour. I'll show you how to do this shortly. I really, really hope you do. In 1987, 2000 and 2007, we had a dress rehearsal of the serious upheaval I believe is lying in wait for us. This time, it's a lot more serious than a handful of upstart entrepreneurs, tech heads and mortgage brokers causing the banks and investors indigestion. The deep state is doing everything in its power to encourage more debt. That alone should be a massive warning sign to anyone with even a passing interest in the financial world. While all this is happening, the investment industry is doing everything possible to keep you inside the sinking boat. This is going to lead many Australians towards financial ruin. I wrote How Much Bull Investors Can Bear for Australians who don't want that happening to them. But when will it happen? Well, the truth is that major events like this rarely have big triggers or flashpoints. For example, the Arab Spring, a revolution that toppled 4 governments, sparked civil wars and led to mass protests and riots in at least 12 other countries, began when a fruit vendor set himself on fire. When the right set of conditions are all aligned, it doesn't take a big event to set off a historic implosion. It's almost always something small and unexpected. Nevertheless, knowing potential triggers on Australia's immediate horizon can be very useful. What are the likely flashpoints here in 2017? What are some warning signs to look for that may indicate the slide is properly underway? My latest book is actually just one part of a library of deep state defence resources that I'd like to put in your hands today. The next resource I'm making available for you online is called 5 Flashpoints to Watch Out For in Australia in 2017. Look, this moment we're coming to, when it hits, you've got to be on the right side of the equation. If you're on the right side of the equation, I believe you'll have the ability to protect yourself and even potentially fast-track your wealth. But you want to be aware. You have to have situational awareness. Most people don't care about this stuff. That's why the deep state has grown so large over time. Through ignorance. You don't want to be in that situation. You want to try to understand in advance what's going on, so you can react in a sensible way, so that you won't panic. I've added 5 flashpoints to watch out for in Australia in 2017 to the library of resources you'll receive, which is aimed to give you situational awareness. With this in mind, there's something else I want you to have. As you will see when you download the package, a cornerstone of my defensive strategy is transferring wealth from risky assets to less risky assets. When the axe falls, most people won't know what hit us. One of my goals is to help you take your capital out of range from the swinging axe. To do that, you need to know which supposedly safe investments might be hit first, which is why I want to give you access to something else. 5 fatal stocks to sell now. As I've said, the investment industry thrives on myths. 2 of the biggest ones are cash is trash and blue chip shares are safe. But history shows something different, that the gravitational pull of reversion to the mean eventually works its way through all the market, even to the bluest of blue chips. In the rush by panic investors to cash up, the most liquid shares are the most readily saleable. How do you get your hands on cash in times of financial upheaval? You are forced to sell your best stuff: blue chip shares, quality property, precious metals. Try finding a buyer for your specky miner in a busting market, and you'll be waiting an awfully long time to receive pennies on the dollar. When push comes to shove and only cash is required, blue chips get sold first, at a discount. They will crash, and crash hard. Some, though, are more vulnerable than others. For that reason, I have highlighted the 5 most dangerous blue chip stocks to own right now. Financial planners, professional market watchers, and industry commentators might scoff at you for placing a sell order on these 5 stocks. But as I hope I've proven in this presentation, their agenda is not yours. I believe these 5 bedrock stocks of the ASX 200 could be gutted when the rout begins. If you hold these stocks, my suggestion is to get out now and turn those shares into cash. Your library contains another vital resource. Only this gift isn't for you. It's a digital version of my first book called A Parent's Gift of Knowledge. This short 120-page book is for your children and grandchildren. In fact, I wrote it for my own daughters to give them the financial mindset needed to navigate the trying times ahead. The new era we are entering will be harder for our children in many ways. They will not have the tailwinds you and I and our parents have had for the last 50 years. During this time, the monetary value of a well-balanced family with a strong moral compass and a work ethic is impossible to calculate. It really is priceless. A Parent's Gift of Knowledge covers how to manage personal finance, stock and property investments, economic events, and family decisions in this new world. I invite you to download your copy and give copies to your own children. There's one more very special resource you'll get when you click on the link below this video window. This comes to you as a gift from my friend, Bill Bonner. Like me, Bill has been observing our growing credit system, and he has seen shocking similarities to other large-scale disasters in history. And what I believe is about to happen shares a very important common thread with almost every single big failure and disaster. But what's more intriguing is that this same thread pops up everywhere, even in places you'd least expect. It's a very simple phenomenon. It's been recorded by scientists, and yet most people don't realise it exists. That's astounding because everything from national debt and credit, to war, to making money and getting rich, to success in business, or how you interact and get along with other people, to almost any task we undertake, even your own projects and life's ambitions, is deeply affected by this one thing. As my friend Bill Bonner says, had Napoleon understood this, his family might still be ruling half of Europe. If that seems incredible, it's precisely why I find this one thing so fascinating. It's everywhere. If more people understood it, said Bill, we'd be leading much healthier, longer lives with far less government intervention. It's so exceptional, he's actually written a book about it called Hormageddon, How Too Much of a Good Thing Leads to Disaster. I would say it's the best book he's ever written, and Bill believes it's the last book he'll ever write because he considers it to be the final word on everything he's spent the last 40 years building. Here's what best-selling Black Swan author Nassim Nicholas Taleb and distinguished professor of risk engineering at New York University had to say about Hormageddon. This is a must read. It is deep, illustrative, witty, pleasant to read. And contrarian economist Mark Faber, aka Dr. Doom, said, I am seldom jealous of anybody, but I truly envy Bill Bonner's writing and intellectual skills. It is funny, cynical, sarcastic, highly informative, beautifully written, entertaining, and most importantly, written by a man who is not afraid to tell the truth and stand up for it. I do not say this often, but when I read his Hormageddon, I was truly in awe. Another reviewer writes, this is a book that works on so many levels, and it's the kind of advice you wish your dad would have given you. You can buy a hardcover copy online, but Bill has kindly given me permission to include an electronic copy of Hormageddon in the intelligence library I've already mentioned. You can gain access to all of them now by clicking on the link below this screen. It's a pretty impressive package. My publisher, Port Phillip Publishing, has never released a dossier of resources of this size and importance before. What makes this package of resources so unique? Well, for a start, it's information and advice from a completely independent source. In How Much Bull Can Investors Bear, for instance, you'll find an entire chapter on my views on whether or not the government will or can honour its bank deposit guarantee. If the crisis really is as bad as I expect, and if our banks, with balance sheets overexposed to residential property, start bleeding red ink, are your savings safe? There's nothing like the loss of trust and confidence to start a bank run. Silent at first, but the sound of pounding feet to and from the banks will become deafening, loud enough to be heard in Canberra. What could happen in this situation? How can you protect yourself? You'll find out in Chapter 14. Only we are truly free to explore such controversial questions for you. Port Phillip Publishing is not publicly funded, nor are we listed and beholden to shareholders. We are independent of the big four banks, the Australian financial industrial complex, the large media companies and big business. This is important. We don't have to pretend not to see this huge credit bubble getting ready to pop and who's really responsible for it. We're all out here on our own. We owe all our success to individuals just like you, not the deep state or big money. So you can see why Bill and I would want to tell you about what we believe to be the defining collapse of the global financial system. We're all in the same boat, and right now I'm worried about what might happen to you and to other Australians when the credit markets seize up. Superannuation funds are gutted. It spreads to every facet of the economy, and it takes years to recover. For that reason, probably the most important thing I'm going to offer you is something I haven't even mentioned yet. It's a pass into a very special group. Because this investigation isn't over yet, what we've uncovered is just the tip of the iceberg. This is what we do every day, try to connect the dots. So I do not want to leave you without offering you a way to stay in the loop about this growing threat and keep you up to date with what's going on. It's like a passport into our world, one that isn't governed by political correctness or the official line or partisan media networks. You see, the story of what comes next in our country, in America, around the globe, is far from over, and there's still plenty to discover. That's why, as well as my new book and all the resources I've outlined so far, I invite you to take a trial subscription of my newsletter, The Gowdy Letter. It's not an investing service, although occasionally I will cue my readers into an investment recommendation if I think it's worthwhile. It's definitely not a trading service or a self-help guide. For me, The Gowdy Letter is a personal project. But for you, it's a front row seat to some of the biggest economic changes of our time. This is a service for people who want more than what they see on TV and in the financial media, who want to tune out all the guff we're constantly bombarded with and tune into something fresh. It's for people who know there's another point of view out there and they just need a way to tap into it. Today, I'm inviting you to join the Gowdy Letter and claim everything I've mentioned so far, including digital copies of my brand new book, How Much Bull Can Investors Bear? Seeing Through the Australian Investment Industry's Smoke and Mirrors, plus digital copies of 5 flashpoints to watch out for in Australia in 2017, 5 fatal stocks to sell now, A Parent's Gift of Knowledge, and Bill Bonner's Hormageddon. I really think this package of resources could easily sell for $1,000 or even $5,000, but I truly want to get this message out to as many people as possible. That's why the price of an all-access 12 months pass to the Gowdy Letter is just $99. However, as a thank you for hearing me out, I want to give you a substantial discount. So I'm reducing that down to just $49. And you can try it at my risk. I'll give you a full 30 days to try out everything you're about to receive. And if you're not totally satisfied, if you are in any way underwhelmed, then you can just call in and receive a full refund during that 30-day period. Frankly, there's a lot to be gained. Just click the button below to get started right away. If you do, there is one more work of research that I think you'll find extremely useful and which I'll make sure is included in your package at no extra cost. I think you'll love it. I'll explain. In previous writings, I have called the period of major financial upheaval that's coming the long bust. During this period, my view is that the government will not have your back. It will be much more concerned with saving itself. But as far as taking care of your own money, to make sure you don't lose any and even use this situation to come out ahead, there is a plan of action you can take. A survival plan for Australia's next long bust. How Much Bull Can Investors Bear? Shines a light into the murky world of the Australian investment industry. This final resource examines the next crisis in more details and looks at the long bust through a wider lens. I put it together so you can do sensible things to make sure you are not blindsided by a downturn so severe, so destructive, that you may never live long enough to recover your losses. It's a financial survival plan, boiled down to 2 steps, and is laid out in full in my previous book, published in 2015, called The End of Australia, the real story behind Australia's coming economic collapse and what you can do to survive it. I take heart that 30,000 people have either ordered or downloaded this book over the last year. Hopefully, many of them already have this plan in place. All of the moves I recommend are fairly straightforward to implement, at least right now. If you wait to do these things, however, they will almost certainly get very expensive, difficult, and even impossible to do. These strategies are based on years of research and analysis, studying the markets and how they move in boom and bust conditions. If you do these things now, not only will you be better prepared to weather the coming storm, you could potentially lock in massive rebound gains if you pick the right assets at the right time. I'm going to include a digital version of this book in the library of resources you'll receive if you click the link below this video window. It will help you understand what's coming, prepare for it, but most importantly, be ready to use it to your advantage when the time comes. When the valuation metrics reach a certain point, which I outline in the book, it will be time to start gradually committing your capital to my post-crash portfolio. I'll show you which assets to target and in what order, and how to gradually shift into these assets while they are still heavily discounted by investors at their wits' end. We've covered some dark material in this video, but chances to make true fortunes tend to come in times of great dislocation. I wrote The End of Australia so you can see what I believe is coming. Survive it. And then beat the herd into the potential once-in-a-lifetime buying opportunities at deeply discounted levels. As dire as the current situation is, I believe the end will pave the way for a new beginning. An Australia that's not addicted to debt. A nation where our children and grandchildren no longer have to bear the burden of our overindulgences. The core message of this video is simple. No one will care for your money like you will. By clicking the link below, you will arm yourself with the resources you need to weather the coming storm. And the choices you make today will decide where you'll be when the slide is on, our financial services industry and economy implodes, and decades of recession-free living come to an end. As I said, you have nothing to lose by downloading these defence assets. You'll have 30 days to make a decision about whether this is for you. If you decide it's not, all you have to do is let us know. You'll receive 100% full refund. That's my guarantee. But the decision is yours. After all, it's your money, your life, your call. Please click below to get started immediately.